And last time we did a lot of work on this fretboard. We got these inlays kind of installed into it. They're not glued in yet, however, because I need to do quite a lot of other work on this before we can do that. One of the things I said last week that we needed to do was to get the radius onto this before we could actually glue these in. However, due to the idiosyncrasies of this particular neck, there's actually a lot more stuff that we need to do before we can do that, and that kind of became apparent as I was working my way through this. Now, ordinarily on a fretboard like this, say on a Les Paul or a 335, the neck would finish square at some point past the last fret, and that's quite easy to bind because you just have a corner. However, on this one, if we look at the neck we've got, it's got more of a fender style heel on it, so it's curved, which means we can't treat it the same way as we would that Gibson style neck, which isn't a problem ordinarily until you come to the binding, because to get that binding to fit properly, you've got to make sure that it is exactly 1.5 mil in this case back from that heel all the way around, which is going to be a struggle. So my plan is that I'm going to get this fretboard trimmed down so it fits exactly as we need it to. We can then temporarily install it with super glue and masking tape, locate it as we normally do with some pins through a fret slot so we know it's going back in exactly the same place. We can route it for the binding, it can come off again, we can then radius it and take it from there. It is going to be a little bit of backwards and forwards, it's going to be a little bit of a mission, but I'm pretty sure this is the best way to do it and will give us the best result. So first up in that is we need to get this something like fitting, and the first thing we need to do is whip this bit off here at the nut line. The nut line in this situation is the end of the fretboard, so we can just cut that straight off. And as normal with these situations, I'm just going to take some of that wood out with the chisel before we get the saw on it, just to give me a nice positive knife wall to register my saw into. Okay, so I've done a load of figuring out and setting up, and I think I'm pretty confident I've got this board in its correct position now. So I'm just going to turn it over and kind of mark it out with a pencil line for now. And then we can get it off the neck again. Get rid of that for a while. And what I'm going to do is do my best to transfer these lines onto the front so we can just check to make sure that everything lines up correctly and that the recesses for the inlays are something like central to what will be the finished board. And as far as I can tell, that is pretty much where we need it to be. There's a tiny bit of variance on some of them, but it's, you know, it's less than 1 millimetre, so I think I'm happy to go with that. So what I'm going to do is a bit blue masking tape so I can see where I'm cutting, and I'm going to just take that ever so slightly over the line. So I will have some excess material to play with. And a trick here, if you are doing this, is put a little bit of tension on the tape. It will pull a fairly straight line. And with that marked up, we can just get it over to the bandsaw and get the waste off. This won't be the last time we trim this down, I'm sure. I've left plenty of material, but it will just help us get it a lot more accurately positioned. Okay, I've got this trimmed down now, so I can kind of tell just by looking at it. I'm kind of just doing a few measurements that were pretty close to where we need to be. And I think any kind of discrepancy is going to be so minor that it really won't make that much of a difference one way or the other. So I think I'm now in a position to put my locating pins in, so I have that repeatable positioning that I need going forward on this. And I'm simply going to do that with a couple of little cut down bits of cocktail stick. So I've already kind of marked where I want this to go, and basically I'm drilling through a fret slot a little way into the neck, but you don't want to go too far, because the last thing you want is to expose one of these when you're doing your actual neck carve. Just stick that in there. Tap it home. We'll probably have to change these out a few times before we're finished with this, but this is a start. With that done, I can very quickly check that we're still properly aligned, and we are. That's beautiful. So I'm just going to mark this now around the heel, and we can get rid of most of this excess material on the bandsaw. I'm going to take a little break there and discuss something that was said in the comments on the last episode that pertains to the inlaying of these mother of pearl markers. Now, there's a couple of things were said, and the first one came from Dane over at Jonah Guitars, link in description, who's a good friend of the channel and has been for a very long time, and he commented that when I said that I was going to have to kind of do a little bit of filling with either Black Star Bond or Rosewood Dust and CA around these inlays when we actually do fit them, that isn't really a fix or a bodge or anything like that. That is just standard operating procedure when you're doing this kind of work. If you have access to a CNC router and a water jet cutter or equipment like that, there is a reasonable chance that you can cut a socket and an inlay that fit absolutely perfectly. If you are doing it by hand, regardless of how skilled you are, and I don't consider myself to be especially skilled in this, you are always going to have to do a little bit of fettling and a little bit of filling. It's just part of the course. It's just what happens. Luckily in this case it won't be much at all, but I have done some repairs on rosewood fingerboards where they've had sizable chunks taken out. I mean literally kind of a chunk the size of your little fingernail, and I've been able to fill it quite effectively with dust and CA glue. Might not be the case on this one because it has got a little bit of figure in it, but if you get a rosewood board that is very uniform, or even an ebony board, I've done that in the past, you can get a very nice kind of almost invisible repair. The other thing that was mentioned was where I got my inlays from, because somebody was looking for inlays that are kind of all the same width as we go down the board. And what he was saying was my method of using a rule against them wouldn't work in a set of staggered inlays. Well, if you can see that, my inlays are pretty well staggered. And the method of laying a straight edge along them does work. Obviously, it's not going to align perfectly with the edges of there, but you can take them off the corners and you will have a pretty good idea of where you're going with things. And to answer the question, I got these off Amazon and they were relatively cheap. They're not brilliant, but they will do the job. However, that isn't the job that we've got in front of us right now. Now, some of you might be thinking, why is he doing all of this before he radiuses the board? And there's one very simple answer to that. I want to put in this binding channel before I do that, because at the moment I've got a nice flat surface, so I can register my router on that and get a nice cut down the side. If I'd radius this, I wouldn't be able to do that, and I'd be looking at some kind of jig or fixture to make that happen. So that's the main reason. Now ordinarily you can do this by just cutting the board a little bit undersize, binding it, and then sticking everything onto the neck at the same time. But I don't want to do that. And the main reason for that is because I just actually on this one want to take the binding below the level of the fretboard and get a really, really nice clean joint in there. Sometimes when you do it the other way, you can get a little bit of a scruffy joint. So I just want to do this and make it look as nice as humanly possible. Okay, so next up is we need to get this fretboard super glued and masking tape down to the absolute maximum. I don't want there to be any risk of this moving while I'm doing the routing. I'm going to take the tuners off as well because they'll just be in the way and there's potential we could damage them. Okay, and as I say, we'll just get some super glue and masking tape onto this. You might be able to see there, I've just blocked off temporarily the hole for the truss rod because I don't want the bearing that I'm going to use on my cutter to go into that at all. So I've just stuck a little bit of the spare rosewood in there for the time being. And I've absolutely smothered this in super glue. And hopefully that will stop any movement. I'm just going to remove the excess of those pins that's sticking up so they're not going to cause us a problem. And that seems good and solid, so we'll get this set up on the bench and break out the router. And this is all set up now, ready to go. I've got just a straight cutter in here with a 1/2 inch bearing on. So the first pass is literally just going to be to flush the fretboard to the side of the neck, and then we'll change out the bearing to a smaller one so we can get that binding channel cut. And there's that channel cut, and I think that's going to look really good. Obviously the fretboard's a little bit higher than the binding at the moment because we haven't got the radius on it, but once we do, that will come down lovely. And it all fits nice at the end as well. So yeah, generally very, very happy with that. The next step is going to be to finally put the radius on this board. However, this episode has gone on a lot longer than I thought it was going to do. There's been quite a lot of work to get it to this stage, and getting the radius onto the board and getting the inlays in and getting it all polished up and getting it nice is going to be quite a lot of work. So I'm going to leave this episode here. I'll be back in a few days' time with the next one. So until then, don't forget to hit that like button if you've enjoyed this, subscribe if you haven't already done so, and I'll look forward to seeing you then. Thanks a lot for watching. Bye bye.